Let's talk about razors and shaving in prison. My name's Jesse, and I spent 19 years in the Virginia prison system. Now I run a nonprofit working to address the needs of returning citizens. So when I first got locked up, it was just after my 18th birthday. I was in the jail, and I didn't have to worry about razors and shaving because I couldn't grow a beard yet. I had a couple little patches of hair on my face, but I couldn't grow anything that I needed to shave, so it wasn't a big deal the way they did razors. Back then, it was twice a week. You could get a little orange safety razor. You go down there, you show them your wristband, they sign your name, you check your razor out, and you have an hour to shave, and you have to bring it back. If you don't bring it back, or if you bring it back and the razor's missing, they go completely crazy. They lock the place down. It was a big deal. But if you imagine trying to shave 2 or 3 or 4 days of stubble with one little safety razor that's a single blade and not very good to begin with, it didn't work out very well. So a lot of guys grew beards and would just shave the under part of their neck. But I remember one guy who wanted to shave for court. He was like, man, I need to look better. And he had this scruffy beard, so he tried to shave it off with the safety razor. He even got the officer to give him another safety razor. It didn't work. It did not work out very well at all, as you may imagine. And so I figured that's how it was gonna be. Like, we were gonna have this crazy tight control over razors, and that was just gonna be it for the rest of the time that I was locked up. That's why I was so surprised when I was finally sentenced and went from jail to prison, and you just have razor blades everywhere. Like, they don't care. Like, you go to commissary and they give you a razor. Those little safety razors, if you're indigent, they'll give you one of those a week. But they just give it to you. They don't like check it out and make you give it back. And it made me wonder, why are jails so concerned? And I later found out one of the reasons is that the most dangerous time for self-harm is generally within 72 hours of a person's arrest. So it makes sense in that jails are more cautious than prisons because yes, we did have incidents of self-harm, we did have lives lost, but generally it was a lot more rare there than it was in the jail when people first had that kind of decline, went from the part of their life that they were living really well or felt really good about to that, kind of low and that collapse. But so shaving was a much different experience, I guess you could say. But again, it comes down to, I really didn't know how to shave. Like, I hadn't learned from my dad because I hadn't been able to shave yet. Plus he had a beard, so I guess I saw him shave his neck, but I never really saw him shave when I was growing up. But I always wanted to learn from somebody. So as my, beard started kind of coming in, I started needing to shave more, I would just kind of go, but I didn't know anything about shaving with the grain or against it. Anyways. So I moved in the cell with this little old man. I got a job in the wood shop and they moved me in the cell, and he used to run the quality control desk, like the thing at the front to make sure that everything we were pushing out like met standards. We got along really well. He taught me a lot of things. He was really kind. We used to play Jeopardy together at night, like compare back and forth. It just ended up being a good situation. I remember I was sitting in the mirror shaving one day and he was like, son, did anybody ever taught you how to shave? And I said, no. So he explained to me about like shaving with the grain and shaving against the grain and doing this. And he started telling me these stories about being in Vietnam and how we would make everyone in his unit shave every day, whether they wanted to or not. And he would make him take a nipple liquor at night. And I was like, that sounds crazy. Like, what are you trying to do? But what he said made a lot of sense. He said, in that place of absolute chaos, you need to have a beginning and you need to have an end of every day. Whether you sleep, whatever happened, you need to have a way to segment it because otherwise the chaos just grows into each other. I remember being struck by like, that's really profound. That's a really important lesson. Hey, if I can build a routine where I have a beginning and an end of every day, maybe that'll help me find this better structure. And that really informed the way that I move forward. So later I found out he was a serial killer. So literally had a serial killer teaching me how to shave and teaching me life lessons. But strangely, he taught me a lot of really valuable life lessons. Like there are a lot of things I learned from him that I'm really grateful for today. So I'm not necessarily grateful that I was in the cell with a serial killer, but I am grateful that I was able to learn from different people. And then I learned the fundamental lesson that no one is just one thing. That this guy may be an absolute terror. He may never be able to be out in the world. He may never be able to run people. He's actually dead, just but he can teach lessons. And it just reminds me, there's this quote in the Tao Te Ching that says, the sage wastes no man. And I always think about that. We take people and we throw them in prison. We basically say, yeah, we're gonna forget them. We don't need them. They're bad, they're wrong. Rather than saying, hey, how can we put this to use? I think about the number of people who are behind bars right now who are costing the state and the federal money. That money, they could be working, they could be on work release, they could be working in a meaningful way, they could be doing mentor programs, they could be doing something meaningful with their time, but instead we throw them away. And that's just, I think, one of the biggest shames of our society is we tend to have this dichotomy of like good and bad. We have this false idea that things are just one thing and they're not. Because I've met some really good people who've done some really terrible things, and I've met some people who on a regular basis are really terrible people, but who have done really kind things. So it's not that it weighs out, it's not that it's about right and wrong and balance, it's just the recognition that people are complicated. But anyway, so once I got to prison and razors were readily available, I found out that they don't even care about the razor blades. Like in the jail, they were so freaked out you were gonna get a razor blade out. In prison, you just have them laying around. Guys have them laying on the table, working on art, using the razor blade to cut up paper. Just wasn't a big deal. And I remember asking somebody, like, aren't they worried about that being a weapon? And he just laughed at me. He's like, bro, you haven't seen the weapons yet? And that was when I started being introduced to prison shanks and knives and lawnmower blades and the one axe that I saw, which was just completely mind-boggling. But I recognized, you know what, this little dainty razor blade is not that big of a threat. Now, it did become a thing. A lot of the gangs were using these. They would put them on the end of a toothbrush and use it just to slash. And it wasn't going to really seriously hurt somebody or seriously damage somebody, but what it was going to do was leave a mark. Like, it was going to let you know that they'd been there, so it was a way that they could mark people, a way they could do something with shame. I guess ultimately, if you slash somebody up enough, you can do the damage, but for the most part, it's just cosmetic rather than really substantial. But yeah, so I recognized that the razor, it just wasn't that big of a deal. Now, what was a bigger deal is they sold pencil sharpeners, and that one blew my mind because those have like a really heavy razor blade thing in there, something that could be used for substantial damage. It wasn't a big deal. The only thing you had to do is if you wanted to get another pencil sharpener, you had to turn in the old one, but half the time they didn't check and you could just take the razor out. So once again, the idea in jail was totally different from the idea in prison, but the biggest thing for me was that we could also get trimmers. So back then, in the beginning, you could only have a 1/4 inch long hair and you had to be clean shaven. Depending where you were, some places you could just get away with shaving your face with the trimmers, but a lot of places like Nottoway, no, you had to be clean shaven, you had to use a razor, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Years, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, they changed the policy and all of a sudden you could like grow a beard, but it could only be a 1/4 inch long. And then finally you could grow your hair, and they just finally got rid of all that because they had held rosters in the hole for 20 years for not cutting their hair. It was one of those things where the court was like, hey, you've held these guys in the hole for 20 years because you say this is a security threat, yet you actually can't explain why this is a security threat. And the DOC was like, well, because they could hide drugs and weapons in their hair. They were like, well, they could hide drugs or weapons in their clothes. You didn't take their clothes away. They're like, yeah, but they don't need their hair. They need their clothes. And we're like, well, there are lots of things they could hide things in that they don't need that you haven't taken away. This, in fact, looks like religious persecution because you've essentially said you're going to take this group of people and you're going to lock them in there for 20 years because of their religious beliefs, yet you provide no justification for that. And the DOC was like, well, yeah. So finally, the court overruled it. The rosters were let out of the hole, which in a way was a disaster because if you imagine people locked up in solitary confinement for almost 20 years coming out into population, it was not a smooth transition. But it was interesting that I would see the opposite. Like, I wanted to have my hair long. That's why, all my old photos, my hair is long because after having to cut it so short for so long, I wanted to have longer hair. And now that I've been out for almost a year and a half, now that I'm kind of settled, I was like, hey, I don't need to have this long, crazy professor hair. Like, I can just shave my head again. I can just have my little beard. I can be comfortable with it. And all that's informed by this kind of crazy journey of shaving and having to grow hair and not being able to grow hair. And I don't know. I'm happy with where I'm at. I'm happy that I get an electric razor for my head so I don't have to do it with a razor blade anymore. And I'm happy to have the choice today to grow my hair long or keep it short or go out into the world however it is. So thank you for listening.